tato jayamudirayat anvayavritirekena vivekeno shatatmana Svargastana samam nayayar Vimrishadmir asatvarai anvayavyatirikena vivekeno shatatmana Sargastana saman nayayar Vimrishadbhir asatvarai. Sober and expert persons should search for the spirit soul with minds purified through analytical study in terms of the soul's connection with and distinction from all things that undergo creation, maintenance, and destruction. Same neti topic. Purport. A person can study himself and distinguish the soul from the body by analytical study. For example, when one considers his body, his head, hands, and so on, one can certainly understand the difference between the spirit, soul, and the body. No one says, I head. Everyone says, my head. Thus, there are two entities, the head and I. They are not identical, although they appear to be one conglomeration. Paragraph. One may argue, when we analyze the body, we find a head, hands, legs, belly, blood, bones, urine, stool, and so on. But after everything is considered, where is the existence of the soul? A sober man, however, avails himself of this Vedic instruction. Yato vai amani bhutani jayante yena jayant jatani jivanti yat pranatya vishang vishvatvanti tadvijnanasava tad brahmeti. Something like that. I'm not really good at Sanskrit. Thus, he can understand that the head, hands, legs, and indeed the entire body have grown on the basis of the soul. If the soul is within, the body, head, hands, and legs grow, but otherwise they do not. A dead child does not grow up, for the soul is not present. If by a careful analysis of the body, one still cannot find the existence of the soul, this is due to his ignorance. How can a gross man, fully engaged in materialistic activities, understand the soul, which is a small particle of spirit, 1/10,000th the size of the tip of a hair? Such a person foolishly thinks that the material body has grown from a combination of chemicals. Although he cannot find them, the Vedas inform us, however, that chemical combinations do not constitute the living force, semicolon. The living force is the Atma and Paramatma, and the body grows on the basis of that living force. The fruit of a tree grows and undergoes 6 kinds of change because of the presence of the tree. If there was no tree, there would be no question of the growth and maturity of fruit. Therefore, beyond the existence of the body are the Paramatma and Atma within the body. This is the first understanding of spiritual knowledge explained in Bhagavad Gita, Dehinosmin yata dehe. The body exists because of the presence of the Supreme Lord and the Jiva, which is part of the Lord. This is further explained by the Lord himself in Bhagavad Gita 9.4. Maya tatam idam sarvam jagat avyakta murtina matstani sarvabhutani nachaham teshvavashtataha. By me, in my unmanifested form, this entire universe is pervaded. All beings are in me, but I am not in them. The Supreme Soul exists everywhere. The Vedas enjoined Sarvam Kalvidam Brahma. Everything is Brahman, or an expansion of Brahman's energies. Sutre Manigana Iva. Everything rests on the Lord, just as pearls are strung together on a thread. The thread is the principle of the Brahman. He is the supreme cause, the Supreme Lord upon whom everything rests. Matak parataram nanyat. Thus, we must study the Atma and Paramatma, the individual soul and the Supreme Soul, the Super Soul, upon whom the entire material cosmic manifestation rests. This is explained by the Vedic statement, Yato va imani bhutani jayante, yena jatani jivanti. While reading this purport, I was thinking of your plan for Brandeis next semester. You probably were thinking the same thing. Science and spirituality and the intersection of them. Several things. One of the cities that I'm going to be visiting in China is a devotee named Granga Prema. Granga Prema is Chinese, and for about 5 years, something like that, he had a visa to do book distribution in Los Angeles. So he had his USA experience. He's obviously bilingual. And then he went back to China, became married, and I'm visiting the place where he and his wife live for a week. And it happens to be the same day as Nrsimha Chaturdasi on that weekend, those days. And they're just going to be opening a I don't know what they're calling it, because you can't call it certain names in Chinese. That's why I have some hair, because I have you can't enter China with the shaved head and Sika. So I've got a little hair. Not a lot, but it's enough to get me in the country. And because it's new people, there's a little preaching center. Then he wants me to do a new people topic for the new people in China. which means, they're not non-resident Indians living in China. They're Chinese people living in China. So what do they know? It's whatever they hear. So it's, introductory. So I'm just sharing, we did around and around and around and around, and it's where it started, it ended up, he agreed to certain topics that are new people topics, and then he did a switcheroo. It was back to a topic that you can't answer. Prove the existence of the soul and God through science. Answer, you can't. Just like this purport. That's why I'm speaking on this topic. So my plan is, I was like, man, this guy's stubborn. So I'm going to say it's not possible. That's the starting point. But there are ways that through science, one can get an indication, the likely. So we're doing some of that. There are 10 ways of this Tattva Sandarbha. I'm not going to go into all of it, but according to Tattva Sandarbha, within philosophy, there are 10 pramanas, the means of knowing something. And of those 10, 3 are most prominent, and those are the 3 that we hear all the time. Direct sense perception, seeing is believing, logic and inference, anuman, pratyaksha, anuman, and shabda. So we'll be spending time in the pratyaksha, or the anuman, even with imperfect senses and minds that are fallible. We'll spend some time on that topic. So that's it. It fits in your topic. That science and spirituality, and where do they intersect? And it's not Prabhupada regularly used the phrase, this is a spiritual science. It's not a blind belief of a type of faith, as dictionary definition has the word religion, in some places at least. A type of faith, religion, type of faith. It's not faith, it's fact. And how can you demonstrate by spiritual science? But spiritual science is not material science. Anyway, I was thinking a little bit about, this is now specific to that fellow that was being stubborn at Brandeis. There was, for those of you that weren't there was a fellow on the topic of the scientific basis of reincarnation. That was the topic. So there was one of the little one slide was on the near-death experience. Got just like out-of-body experience has an acronym OBE. So there's an NDE, near-death experience. And there's a team that neither of them are American. One was from Sweden, if I remember correctly, from another part of the world, for Eastern Europe. So 2 professors, 2 scholars got together, did research on near-death experiences. This was the topic that we had a little disagreement on. And they explored by interviewing the individuals who were on their deathbed, and they had a near-death experience, and obviously they survived because they could be interviewed afterwards. What did they experience during that near-death experience? And the number was a big number, 400 around 450 of both in USA. I don't know, they're European fellows, but they research people in the USA in hospitals. And then they interviewed the doctors and the nurses and the people that were in the room when this near-death experience was reported by the person who survived. And then the other half, about the same number, were from India. I don't know how they got their data, but that's what the report says. So the fellow didn't like the explanation. It's just data. I'm just reporting what the data says. So there were two common characteristics out of the 800 people. There were two particular characteristics, and one of them was during that near-death experience, they experienced a tunnel, a big, many-person tall kind of tunnel, and then light at the end of the tunnel. And then something on the other end of the tunnel, like angels or, who knows if there was sound involved. But so that was one of the consistent experiences. And then the other was a kind of euphoria, meaning no worries. Like, Shanti. Most people don't have Shanti. They have worries. They have anxieties and this is and that's, negative emotions. So it's just euphoria. Those two experiences, both subjective. So the fellow that was like the grad student who was the smartest guy in the room was telling everybody else in the room, including me, that this is wrong. I mean, he didn't say it, but that's what he was saying. Because, in India, the report is when people have their near-death experience, he didn't use Ajamila's name, but the Yamadutas come and the Yamadutas leave, and then the person is still there. But that was that. So, and that's not what the report. There's no tunnel. There's nothing described in scripture for people that are Hindu that have the experience that you said was one of the two common experiences. That was like we went around and around and around and around and around, and he kept going back to the same thing. It wasn't around. It was just stubborn obstinacy. It's just data. It's just like, come on, man. That's what the data says. But I was thinking, it's a situation with the Jamila is one place in the scripture. It's not only in the Bhagavatam, it's in other parts of the Puranas. The Jamila story is also narrated. And he was extremely sinful. So he was going to the court of Yamaraj because a decision needed to be made. What would be his next destination due to that the degree of his sinfulness? In other words, that is a model that doesn't have to fit everybody that doesn't go to something other than the hellish planets. Because the hellish planets is not just a lower life form, it's a place. And then there's a description of the hellish planets in the 5th canto, and it's a place. And there's a lot of misery. And persons that before going there's a trial. Their case is pleaded, and Yamaraj decides, and off they go to the hellish planets. So I've been thinking about, how you're going to prepare for this, and meeting this fellow and having him stay within boundaries of, respect and decorum, instead of being a bully in the public forum. It would probably take, some graduate study research to say, here are different experiences from different traditions, and And that model doesn't necessarily apply to everybody that dies or has a near-death experience. It's because the students in Brandeis seem to be bright. They're not necessarily PhD material for Ivy League school, but they're bright. So it's not going to be satisfying, nor a proper presentation, to just do introductory shoot from the hip kind of thing. It seems to me you're going to have to do a fair amount of research in advance and have specific topics well researched, and a presentation or a handout or a combination or something, so that they're prepared. You are help them prepare for that topic, because what Prabhupada is doing is very reasonable. And that fellow let him read this purport, and he'll probably find fault with it, because he's the smartest guy in the room. Smarter than the acharyas that write commentaries. Therefore, boundaries. Now, what Prabhupada is speaking, it's Srimad Bhagavatam, and Srimad Bhagavatam is authoritative. And so Srila Prabhupada and anyone who's writing commentary has to be very careful. Not to say he wasn't, but because people are going to read his Bhaktivedanta purports later, and those persons that have this empiric information or that empiric information are likely going to question even little things or medium things would speak of big things. So it's quite reasonable. And then reasonable people, and then there's unreasonable people. I think they're the smartest one in the room kind of personalities. So I'm spending time with this in part because what you're planning. And hopefully at the end of the semester, not only that individual will learn a little bit about proper behavior and etiquette, but the rest of the people in your group will be talking about the topic and sharing with others, and probably it'll grow because it's a hot topic somehow, at least for thoughtful people. Related is why is this coming in Canto 7, Chapter 7? And the answer is, Prahlad is just narrating what he learned in the womb. And what he learned in the womb was beyond the body, was Shabda Praman. But even Shabda Praman gives some indication. So, and in the Bhaktivedanta purport, Prabhupada, is taking the topic of the verse, that is analytical study, which is not bhakti. So go back. The topmost is bhakti, and analytical study is not the topmost. But analytical study may be engaged or deployed for one who wants to move on the path of bhakti, so they don't fall in a pothole, or they don't fall into some standard misconception of something, misunderstand bhakti because of a standard misunderstanding. And therefore, it's mentioned is, in other words, it's supportive of, but not the essence of, bhakti. So we don't trash. It's not advised. Prahlad is not advising. Bhagavatam doesn't advise to trash analytical study. But analytical study must align with the goal. Otherwise, it's not analytical study, it's something else. It's speculation, fruitless. When one becomes, or say the same thing in a different way, when one becomes a bhakta or devotee, one doesn't take the intelligence and switch it off. The intelligence is still on. And it applied towards that which is sat. And there's the param satyam dhimahi, meditation upon the supreme sat, the supreme personality of Godhead, for that matter. And so the analytical study for a devotee should align. Now, then comes, academics and developing careers and, doing stuff in the world, and the stuff that we do in the world, that stuff that takes care of your maintenance, is not always that kind of application of intelligence, engineering. No, it's acknowledging that there are material laws and manipulating the material laws according to, what can earn a living for yourself or for a company that you're working for, et cetera, et cetera. But that's not, the purpose is not alignment with accepting that which is going to enhance my bhakti. Unless one is careful in developing that academic knowledge and then become very proficient in making things aligned with the Supreme, because the laws of material nature and the laws of material nature from the Supreme. Without acknowledging that, I can learn some laws of how material nature works. That's what engineering is, the cause and effect of things. You wiggle something over here, and then something over there wiggles, and now you're an inventor. You've got a career. For a devotee, it's not wrong. It's not to be avoided because it's detrimental to bhakti, to learn the laws of cause and effect of nature. To do that minus any connection with the ultimate cause of those laws of nature, that's detrimental. So most of the professors, the educators, they're not on the transcendental platform. And so they're not the ones who are going to teach you how to connect cause and effect with the original cause. So a devotee needs that kind of curiosity or acumen or perseverance to go down the path of not only understanding how to operate a computer, and I have a master's degree in computer science, but what are some of the principles behind it and the application of those principles behind it? For what end is all of this? That when somebody has that light on, they may be gifted by Super Soul with intelligence to understand a higher purpose, a higher alignment, a higher application of all of this. Whether it makes money, apparently, quickly or not. The higher purpose is making that connection. The purpose of life is not having a job and then paying your bills and getting old and dying, and then that's it. But that's not the purpose. So there are persons that have their lights on. It's a challenge, but challenges are nice. How to align with the perfection of life. How to conduct a discussion on the relationship between science and spirituality. Why have that discussion anyway? And what would be the objective of doing that besides having a nice lively dispute amongst intellectuals? And who's going to be the victor, and who's going to be the victim, and who's going to be the referee? There was a time not so long ago where instead of basketball and football and baseball and Olympic competition and sports and things like that, there's a different kind of sport, and that was debate. One intellectual, one proud, highly learned fellow would go from place to place and find out who's the smartest person in this learned place, and then challenge someone who's that smartest person in debate. And there were rules. I mean, it was a sport. It was one of the things that was done amongst Brahmana type people. They still have that competition spirit, at least to some extent, and the rules. Of course, who's the referee? But when someone was the victor, then there was an obligation to surrender to the one who defeated you, and then whatever followers you had become their follower or followers, and vice versa. Those rules. A nice example of this, there's many, but one nice example is Jiva Goswami. Spoke about him yesterday. He, was so learned that although at that time India was largely, and even in Vrindavan or Mathura in the UP area, now UP area, there was a Muslim ruler, and his palace was just down the road. The main road from Delhi to Agra, and Mathura was on the way. So, in Emperor Akbar's palace, he was a king, a Muslim king, but he was also a learned person. So he had his scholarly people. They weren't necessarily Brahmanas, but Brahmana-like persons, and they had a debate. And the debate was, which river is greater, the Jamuna or the Ganga? And some were on this side, and some were on that side, and they couldn't settle. So Akbar sent a messenger to Vrindavan and invited Jiva Goswami, can you preside over our court and decide? We'll accept whatever you say. You know the story? So Jiva Goswami said, I've taken a vow. I won't stay overnight outside of Vrindavan. There was some history of that having happened, and then he took a vow afterwards. He won't leave. He'll go. He may go, but he won't spend the night outside of Vrindavan. It's like, a wife in her home. She doesn't go stay some other place. And so the king said, very well, I'll send a royal chariot, like a Rolls Royce. So a royal chariot came to Vrindavan from Agra, picked him up in one morning, and took him to the court. And Jiva Goswami settled the problem very easily. There must have been some extended discussion back and forth, but the basis of his statement, which everyone accepted, at least reasonable people accepted, was that the Ganges is sacred because it washed the feet of Lord Vamana. However, the Jamuna is even more sacred because Krishna played in the river Jamuna and bathed in the river Jamuna, and so Jamuna is even more sacred. And I'm sure there were other statements scripturally, etc., etc., etc. And then he came back by royal chariot to Vrindavan. But debate was a thing at least amongst Brahmanas. Now, Kshatriyas would engage in other kind of combat, and Vaishyas another kind of combat, and so combat in and of itself is not problematic, depending upon, are people cultured or not. So it's healthy. Therefore, I recommended you don't call it a debate, just call it discussion. And then in advance, somebody is recognized as the referee. And then what that referee says, that's it. It's not the same, but it's like in a Vedic yajna. Traditionally, there are different yajnas for different purposes, but the ones that are explicitly for the satisfaction of Vishnu, there are 4 brahmanas representing each one of the 4 Vedas, and they're chanting mantras from each of those 4 Vedas. And then there's another person that's the referee. He's the one that oversees everything. And if he detects there's been some mistake, then he has a whistle, and he blows the whistle, or he says stop. And they yield because although they're brahmanas, and quite commonly they're proud brahmanas, they accept the referee's position. The referee says, this was a mistake. Here was the mistake. Now go back and start again, at least from such and such point. And then they would do it again. Until, so then it can be completed. But there has to be somebody, you're going to have a discussion, there has to be the buck stops here person, some referee that can decide. Or we need more discussion, or whatever is the decision. And then, the persons who are participants have to, salute to the captain. Otherwise, it's Kali Yuga unleashed. No resolution. As using Prabhupada saying, passing resolution, no resolution. And that referee in discussions has to honor, on the one hand, points that are good, and on the other hand, not just be partial to any point that's made that sounds theistic, because some points that are made that are theistic or God-centered, they don't carry the same weight as someone that may say something else. So it has to be, the right person that's the referee in discussions. So back to the purport. The topic is the application from the previous verse, the analytical study to understand who we are. That's one of the things that Prahlad is saying, I learned in the womb, from Narada Muni. And there's a kind of, as indicated in the verse directly, done properly, it's purification. Now, what's that purification? Purification meaning letting go of misconceptions. And you, when you let them go, you let them go. And they float. They go downstream with the river, and it's no longer, something that you consider seriously when you, after having gone through that little analysis of analytical study of. Now the conclusion, it's in the purport. What, same as we discussed yesterday, what the spirit soul is not accomplished by saying what the spirit soul isn't. To say we don't say I head or I arm. We don't identify self with the body or the parts of the body. We don't identify the self with the whole body. Because we can also say, I'm not this whole body. Am I? So then that which is sat is not the body, because the body is asat. So by process of elimination or definition by negation, the soul is not all those things. And then comes this understanding of references from the Vedic model. Brahman is what exists. Brahman Satya. Brahman is what exists. So what is and where is Brahman? So it's a category of that which is not matter, is spirit. And spirit is all-pervasive. And then there are different features of all-pervasiveness. For example, there's all-pervasiveness in the form of material prakriti. And then there's all-pervasiveness with Brahman, the spiritual effulgence of the personality of Godhead is existing everywhere. Brahman is existing everywhere. You'll say it negatively. Are we situated in the spiritual sky right now? Yeah. Because where's the spirit? The material world is situated in the spiritual sky. It's not the spiritual sky, but just like there's clouds in the sky, and the cloud is not the sky, but it's situated in the sky. And when the cloud dissipates, that's just the sky. So Prakriti is an expansion of the energies of the Supreme Lord. So we can't touch it or experience it by material sense perception, or even by inference and logic. But the spiritual reality is everything comes from Brahman. And we're within that now. Then it comes how to understand Vedic statements, because here in this purport there's several. And there's long discussions on impersonalists, what they say, and personalists, what they say. And there's a different perspective on the same statement. Diametrically opposite perspectives on the same statement. And, primary Vedic statements. And that's the difference between impersonalism. So Shankaracharya brought the Vedas back and then stood on these principal verses with the explanation of those principal verses. And that prevailed for a long time. And then each of the four Sampradaya Acharyas manifested their Vaishnava teachings during a period of time when Shankara's teaching was it. And people knew it. They knew the impersonal. And then they came along and had to assert something else. And because they were empowered personalities, and they were right, although they differed in some ways, they in essence, for example, there's the oneness, Sarvam Kalvidam Brahma, the big discussion between Vaishnava acharyas and Shankara followers. Big discussion. That's a debate. But the Vaishnava picture is different than the materialist, and the Vaishnava picture is different than the impersonalist. So how to get it right? So, one could say, well, it depends on what school you go to. That was one of the arguments that was going on in the room at Brandeis. Different people have different, so their near-death experience is going to be different because they have different experience. So anyway, it's subjective. Anyway, it's going to be an interesting topic. If you have some students with their lights on, then they're going to also prepare and have their research, and there's a way of supporting what they want to say, and it's what universities are meant for, anyways. Reaching the right conclusion of what's what. That's real knowledge. And if there's enough interest, it could be very uplifting for all the students that are participating. So back to the purport. These references, they're only touched on. There's extensive books, etc. Volumes and volumes written to explain each of these phrases. Prabhupada's just touching them. But the touching is just fine, because it's important to understand the scriptural foundation for the spiritual perspective of spirit different than matter, the soul different than the covering of the soul, and scriptural foundation besides reason and logic. No, that's not what Prahlad is teaching his classmates. But Prabhupada is doing that in his Bhaktivedanta purport, right here, and so many other. We have a. I'm going to end with this. We have a great opportunity to have the Srimad Bhagavatam with the Bhaktivedanta purports, including references from this acharya, that acharya, this scripture, that scripture, along with the text itself. Yesterday evening, the family that hosted us, there's the grandma. The grandma was radiant. And it was explained by the family that she reads Srimad Bhagavatam every day in Sanskrit. And I asked, with purports? No purports. Is there purification? Yes. It's very, she was radiating. She was like a light bulb, and she was bright. I don't know if you noticed. It's one of those scientific basis of the soul and God is photons. stones don't emit, or pots and plates don't emit photons, because photons is an indication that there's life. Plants, yes. Stones, no. A living body, yes. A dead body, no. It's science and the soul. And somebody can do some research on that, but therefore, when spiritual personalities are depicted in paintings, often there's a halo, or like a glow, because they're glowing. Literally. Not figuratively, but also literally. Measurable by science, photons. I don't know how it works, but scientists know. And who's seen a photon? They have pictures, photographs of what, this is what the light emanating from a living entity looks like. And they could make a photograph of it, a certain kind of camera, make a photograph of it. So it's perceivable. But no stone or dead body will do that. And then persons that are more Krishna conscious, more spiritually elevated, they radiate more photons. The low consciousness person, less. Or a tree and a plant, less. But they're the instruments to measure the photons from a tree or a plant. Nice topic. Okay, I'm going to end. And let's see if there's some discussion. You have something?
Raj, for this wonderful lecture. This phrase, the science of self-realization, this spiritual science, it has always fascinated me, that how the Srila Prabhupada has said that this is a spiritual science. I just wanted to share my understanding, and I would like I would like for you to point out my mistakes, or
Elaborate.
Yes, limit. So I can see that, as Srila Prabhupada said, that by following this bhakti process, qualities emerge in people. Then those are very much verifiable. I mean, you can see that you become more calmer in situations, and various other things.
Yeah.
Then the other thing, by reading these scriptures, vairagya, detachment develops. That you can very much verify, that initially you were attracted to these material things, now you are attracted to very different spiritual things. That's very much verifiable. At least I see those things as very scientific, because that has happened to everybody.
Yes.
Who has come into this into Krishna consciousness. Then
in degrees, of course.
Yes.
Yeah.
The part which I think, where I start seeing there is a fundamental limitation, because in Bhagavad Gita itself, this is my understanding, this is that the soul cannot be verified or measured through material senses. It's beyond that. At least that's my understanding. Therefore, the soul directly, I don't think the material senses can verify, or material sciences can verify. But then again, the statement you made yesterday, I really liked it in yesterday's class. Every 7 years, all our cells are changing. So that's what medical science tells us. But we are still here. Then which part of us is still here, which is animating the body? So that points to the soul. So there are certain aspects of this which are very verifiable, and then certain aspects which are beyond the material sciences. That's my understanding so far about spiritual science.
Three things. One is things that you can't see or measure. There are characteristics that indicate the presence of that thing, like electrons and electricity, the flow of electrons. There's a science to it, but by symptoms or in the absence of those symptoms, and that's one. Second is a definition that Paramarupa gave in Brandeis. Science to many people, science means you can do it again and again and again and again and again and again and again, and you get the same results again and again and again, and therefore that's a science. Now, I don't know if all scientists would agree with that definition, but it's a nice one. Verifiable, regardless of circumstance. Whatever the exceptions are, there's a rule that determines that exception also. So, and a third item is a detail, and I think it's worth you or somebody, maybe before you go to this discussion next semester, is that really, I repeated it, and I've also heard something different. So I'm not sure that that medical science would agree with the statement that all the cells in the body change every 7 years. Because somebody that wants to put it, something that can flip your bicycle over, put a stick in the wheels of the bicycle, they can just stick that one in there and then bicycle flips. So when touching this topic, it's good to have done your homework before you enter into that discussion. And in many cases, it just flies, and no one will question it, but sometimes people question it. So it's good to be informed. And it's the nature of knowing things based upon pratyaksha and anuman is fallible. That's my comment on what you said.
One other thing, Guru
Go right
Maharaj, on
ahead.
this, just to follow on this, isn't there a inherent limitation unless somebody has actually done devotional service, then only you can appreciate the soul, or you can at least appreciate the peacefulness. That's like the starting point. Otherwise, you can keep on having arguments, I guess.
No, I don't agree with you.
Okay.
And we've had this is another nice discussion or debate. We had this discussion in Houston. I raised a question in the Bhagavatam class, sitting on the Vyasa-san. Is it possible that there's verses that say the answer is yes. Is it possible that one can experience bliss without bhakti? Transcendental bliss without bhakti? The answer is yes. Limited and temporary. But cessation of material existence, there is such a thing. Limited and temporary. And there's a happiness that's connected. Brahma Sukh. And that's what those who are pursuing the process, non-bhakti process, that they can't get Bhagavan realization without bhakti, but they can get Brahman realization without bhakti. limited and temporary. So be careful.
Thank you. Thank you, Guru Maharaj.
Hare Krishna, Guru Maharaj. So I have a question about the validity of like different subjects. For example, I'm currently studying psychology, and a lot of the concepts shown in the book are theories.
Yes.
And it's like most of them, like I scroll through the book and it's theory after theory after theory. So if we don't know what's fully true, how are we supposed to connect it to spiritual science?
It's kind of like, my answer is a cute answer. Fair to partly cloudy. There's never a clear sky. To what extent? Fair to partly cloudy. You look in that, you can see something, but not 20/20 vision. So is there may be some trace of, but it's trace of, because where is it arising from? The principle is, where is it arising from? It's arising from the mind. And the mind taking data and evaluating the data with material intelligence. So it's sense perception, reason, and logic from an entity that's covered. Fair to partly cloudy. Maybe something that's directional. So you can give it a nod. But it's incomplete because the place that it's arising from. Then take that same, back to your question, take that same theory, and is there some presentation within the Vedic text that's from an infallible source, not a fallible source, that says same thing or something close to the same thing? When there's to the degree, then you can accept it with confidence. And otherwise, it may be useful to some degree, but fallible at the same time. A good one to have this discussion with is this young lady back here, because that's the field that she works with. And I'm sure she's thought about it more than just, taking a course in undergraduate or high school, and how does it fit with reality, with the capital R? And things that there can be usefulness of some things, but it doesn't make them, truth with a capital T or reality with a capital R. Okay? Yes? Keep it simple. I'm challenging you before you speak.
Thank you, Maharaj. Maharaj, can you explain, you said that what Prahlad Maharaj is teaching versus the Bhaktivedanta purport here is different. I didn't understand how.
I don't understand your question. You understand his question?
He's referring to the statement that you made that there are certain things that are mentioned. That's not what was directly spoken by Prahlad.
Well, how short is the verse and how long is the purport? It's not that what's in the purport contradicts what's in the verse, but there are details that's in the purport that's not in the verse. Go ahead, ask it again. That's your methodology. I'm learning your methodology.
No, I kind of understand what you're trying to say.
No, he's not saying there are extra words, But the concept is not a different concept. There's expanding of the concept and the application of that expansion of the concept. That's what's not in the verse.
So, what is there in that verse? Like, you also made one more statement that the Bhaktivedanta purports, like whoever writes a commentary should be careful that someone might question. Some smart guy
okay,
should.
that's take the microphone from him. Prabhupada was writing for the world, for posterity, and any great acharya is doing that. Well, I'll modify that. During the time of Rupa Goswami, there was not just harassment by Muslim rulers, but it was life threat. In many cases, literally there was a price on the head of a Vaishnav or one who wasn't a follower of Islam. I'm the king. Bring me a head of such a person, and I'll give you some money. There's a price on the head. So during Rupa Goswami's time, it was explicit. He didn't know who his reader was going to be. He wasn't writing so that now we can have the manuscript and the translation of the manuscript and commentaries on the translation of the manuscript and so forth. He was just writing for the devotees of his time. The devotees of his time. That's who he was writing for. No, and pleasing Krishna. Now, Prabhupada, circumstance was different. He had knowledge of printing, Bhaktivinoda Thakur, starting with Bhaktivinoda Thakur and Bhakti Siddhanta. The world. And people in the world have different cultures and different languages and different concepts. And so Prabhupada was writing for the world, for spiritual elevation. So when you're writing for the world, you have to be careful that later somebody might come along and say, wait a minute, XYZ. It still goes on, but the writer, Prabhupada, has to be careful that the points that he's making are fundamental and in principle based and not in all circumstances application based. It has to be a thoughtful composer of Bhaktivedanta purports. Particularly, the translation and commentary of such texts as Bhagavad Gita, Srimad Bhagavatam, and Chaitanya Charitamrita. Essays, so there are different rules. So the comment was, one has to be very careful. Prabhupada was very careful. Knowing readers, next generation may come along with saying, wait a minute, blah, blah, blah. That's all. No, I'm going to give the microphone to someone back there.
Hare Krishna Guru Maharaj, thank you. Maharaj, this is relating to the book distribution. When we are doing book distribution, the topic of soul comes into play, like at some point when we are discussing with a newcomer that has come to take the book. At that time, it's a very wonderful explanation that I've heard in this lecture today about the near-death experience. And most of the times, I have been able to explain that, existence of the soul. So when we say somebody's died, what do you mean somebody's died? So, right? So there was something existing which is not existing anymore in that body. So that's how I was explaining. But is there a better explanation that I can
That's fine. That's not near-death experience. That's death.
Yeah, death and also both. Explaining both, actually.
Huh?
Explaining both.
Well-
the concept is explaining the existence of soul.
But I recommend out-of-body experience is more compelling than a near-death experience. You know the distinction? So, and there are different ways, different books written on the topic of, and it doesn't have to be cardiac arrest. Kind of, it can be a car accident or all kinds of examples where persons have some whatever, a trauma or something, and they have an experience of existing outside the body. And they describe that existence outside the body, and it's different. But one of the advantages of cardiac arrest is the body's dead, clinically dead, and consciousness is still continuing with perception of the senses, such as sight and ears, and the memory still operating, even when the body is dead, which gives evidence of consciousness, or the soul, which is the seat of consciousness, is something other than the body. It's, at least for me, it's more compelling. Now, you're going to do what you're going to do, and the persons are going to hear what they're going to hear, and everything is there's a lot of subjectivity going on when you're having a conversation like this. And for curious persons, or those persons who want to know more tomorrow than what they knew yesterday, then this is an opportunity for you to to fill in the blank, to become a little bit more in knowledge of these sciences of the soul. And in a conversation, a book distribution, you can get away with that without a big long half an hour discussion. Generally,
Attention span is very small.
What?
Attention span is very small when we're distribution.
they're on their way.
Yes, Maharaj.
Even while you're talking with them, they have 3 steps going down the street.
Yes, Maharaj.
I understand.
Thank you, Maharaj.
Some people are a little more on the curious side, and they'll spend a little more time depending on their curiosity. So you have a short window of time to capture their curiosity and their openness. Okay?
Thank you, Maharaj.
Yes.
Hare Krishna Guru Maharaj. I had a question from the prior Wednesday class,
From the which what?
the Wednesday morning class.
Wednesday morning class. Okay.
So, in that purport, it was mentioned that we need to keep ourselves busy in Bhakti Seva so that we can move forward with the body that we have. So, my question was, there are situations where seniors advise us it's better to slow down so that we are able to continue with the service. I had a question in my mind. By slowing down, we may become complacent. So how do we measure that we are slowing down or not become complacent?
Attentiveness. What is it that you're being attentive to? Whether slowing down or speeding up, or in between. Attentiveness. Or another phrase I've grown to like a lot is presence, which is very similar to attentiveness. Let's take chanting. One can chant very slowly. One can chant medium. One can chant fast. How do you know that you're not being complacent? Are you present with the holy name? Or not? Okay? Okay. You get the last question.
This is a question from Krishna Priya Mataji.
Okay.
I'm just reading out. Hare Krishna. One way to explain the analytic way of understanding soul is by the list of things Krishna describes as the qualities of soul versus body, like that which cannot be burnt or cut
Yeah,
into pieces.
Right.
Especially thinking of children, it is easy to explain each of these 15 to 20 differences in chapter 2, and they understand that soul is not all of that they see in matter. And then there is a huge gap between their understanding of what soul is not, but not quite understanding what soul is.
Yeah.
How can we help them have that felt experience of soul by this process?
Well, there's a George Harrison saying, the proof of the pudding is in the tasting. Oh, there's a Vedic way of saying the same thing. So it's as this nice devotee was explaining his understanding what science means, there are predictable, over a period of time, predictable outcomes of engaging in spiritual activity where there's spiritual outcome by symptoms. The reduction of this and the increase of that. That, the proof of the pudding is in the tasting. So you can, Krishna Priya, you can encourage the young students to consider, as youngsters are not so inclined to do, a thoughtful picture over a period of time, or comparing your experience, this young student, because she's a teacher, with persons that are unruly and persons that are well behaved. And is there a difference, and what makes the difference? Is it possible, subjectively, is it possible to have someone that's a little bit restless become very calm and peaceful? And is it for you, then you can not challenge, but invite them. Let's make an experiment over a period of time, because that's how yoga or practice, abhyasa, works over a period of time. So then, there may be, that's not proof, but it's something, as opposed to nothing, of what the soul really is. The experience of the soul is, there's lakshana or characteristics. Just like taking this example, 20 things of what the soul isn't, and then what the soul is. And what is, yeah. When there's experience of bhakti rasa, then you can know. When you're eaten to your capacity, you can tell somebody else, I'm full. You don't have to have somebody else tell you you've had enough. You can tell them. So it's the same. By the subjective experience of being in contact with that which is spiritual, then you have that subjective experience by which you can know, I'm feeling full. Nasoshati, nakangsati, etc. Now you have to have some investment of time and attention to get to that place. Young children may not be ready to invest the time and attention, but that's how one can know. Characteristics. I'm going to end. Thank you very much, Prabhupada.